Hello, I'm Nervous Test Pilot and I'm going to talk to you today about my remix of a Plaid track called Tether. Now, the first thing I'd like you to do, if you would be so kind, would be to go to SoundCloud and like the track, and also if you have a SoundCloud account, please repost it. This competition that the remix is for is based on likes, and it's pretty difficult to get likes on SoundCloud. You really need to get reposted on pages that have a lot of viewers. So if everyone watching this does it, then I have some chance. I'm currently third, I'm really close to second. I think it's going to be quite difficult for me to catch Ion Driver, who's in first right now, but it would be nice to give him a run for his money. The other top two remixes, and indeed a lot of the other remixes, are really good, so do check all of them out when you're there. But what I'm going to do today is just talk a little bit about the remix. I'm going to show you some of the stuff I have in my studio here, and then I'm going to go into the project file and show you kind of basically how I did everything for it, which might be useful to some of you who are producers. But first I wanted to talk a bit about why I'm so keen on this. It's not really to do with the competition or the prize, it's to do with the fact that when I started making music, one of the first acts that really kind of showed me that you could do the kind of melodic electronica that I wanted to do were Plaid, and ever since their album Double Figure, really, I've been a fan. I got to meet them once, did an interview with them when I was writing for Computer Music magazine, and they've been a huge inspiration to me. You might know my work from the Frozen Synapse soundtrack if you're a gamer, Frozen End Zone as well, and that stuff wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Plaid's influence. So getting to remix a Plaid track, getting all the stems and stuff for free was immensely cool, and I've put a lot of work into this remix and I hope you like it. So that's a bit of backstory. I'm now going to show you some of the equipment I've got here and then talk a bit about production, so stay tuned. Okay, starting over here with probably the most important thing in the studio are these Mackie HR824 monitors. It really changed my whole production thing when I got these. They have great bass response, they're really full, and I love them. You've probably seen them before if you've seen any videos I've made. Coming down here, the Yamaha CS1X is just a controller keyboard. Don't really use any sounds from that anymore. Let's go this way and we'll find something that is a little bit more interesting. Now this is the brand new synth that I've got called the Soulsby at Megatron, made by the incredible Paul Soulsby. Let me just give you a shot of that right there, and it has this really sort of rough and dirty sound. You can hear the filter there. These very nice lighting up sort of nipples as well, and that gets used on this track quite a lot. I'll show you those parts later when I'm in the sequencer. Coming over here, we've got the good old Yamaha DX100, which again you probably will have seen in a previous video. It's pretty useful for kind of classic Yamaha type sounds, and I'm just getting into programming that. A new acquisition down here is the Roland D550, which is the rack mount version of the D50. It is a nightmare to program, but it's really, really good for certain sounds. Let me just see if I can quickly come over here and get a sound out of it for you. To get the right channel, perhaps. Yeah, there's kind of bell, sort of big soundtracky 80s bell sounds, really cool. You can do other stuff with it as well, of course. Coming over here, get rid of this stuff, is the Korg Microkorg, and this is a synth that I've had for a long time, and it's just really cool. It's quite weird. You can do a lot with it. Sort of digital sounds, sort of pseudo-analog sounds. Just a nice little thing, and the interface is kind of a bit weird. It has this like matrix selection thing, and then but you can get some weird sound out of it. Really terrible mixer that I've just had in the attic and brought down to start using on stuff, but just added hardware back into my setup. Coming over here, this is just my audio interface, Native Instruments Complete Audio 6, quite useful, and the Access Virus TI as well, which is mostly used for dance stuff, but as you'll hear on this track. I did use it for a couple of sort of digital things. And finally this, just a U-Control, UC33 MIDI controller that's quite handy for just putting in automation data. I'm starting to get more into my complicated automation, so you can assign all these to different things, and with the hardware as well, it's quite useful to have some stuff to send out. So so there we go, that is that, and in a second we will get into the track. Right, okay, so here we are in the project file for the Plaid remix, and one of the first things I do when I'm trying to remix something is take a listen to all the stems. So these are some of the stems that Plaid put up on their SoundCloud page, and here's one that I ended up using part of. It's the high bass sound. It's really cool, kind of plucky, analogy sound with a lot of modulation and stuff going on. In general, it seems like what Plaid are doing on this album is using some of these quite detailed analog sounds. You can hear this blip sound here. It's really kind of evolving, sort of almost modular type sound, which is very cool. So I take a listen through all the stems, and then I try and find something that's distinctive about the track that I can use, you know, in order to basically cue people in that it is a remix and give me something to build on. And in this case, this track isn't very sort of hooky. It doesn't have like a particularly, you know, strong, like a pop melody line. It has this kind of cool evolving chord thing. And that's what I ended up kind of focusing on. It was this thing. Let's filter on that. So as I was listening to that, I kind of felt that it was almost like a groovy sort of house type chord sequence. And that made me kind of want to slow it down, so I took the whole track down to 115 BPM, which is kind of an unusual BPM, just something I'm kind of playing around with at the moment. And I started to build up around this chord sequence. So I got that original chord sequence that you heard just there, and then I added some layers to it, and I'm going to play you the main chord layers now. So that sort of was my starting point. Now these layers here are from FXpansion Strobe, which is an awesome track, of course, kind of immortalized in that Deadmau5 track, but it's really good for these quite like almost digital sounding but still sort of analogy chord sounds. So I put a couple of layers of that on there. And in my laziness, didn't bus all this together. Something that I'm doing a lot at the moment is using Isotope Ozone for the stereo spread. It has this really nice stereo imaging section where you can do it at sort of multi-band stereo imaging, so you can find the bands that you like and spread them out. You can also delay bands, and that just gives the top end of that a bit of width. So there's a very simple signal chain here, just a bit of compression and that on the end. So that kind of formed the basis for the sort of mid part of the track. What I'm going to do now is just go back to the start and talk about the intro and some of the general sounds that I use in the track. So here's the intro. Right, so the first thing I did was to take that blip part I played you earlier and sort of re-pitch it. So this is really easy to do in live. You can just take sections out like this, and then you can see here I transposed that. This one went down an octave, that one went down 5 semitones, that one went down basically a semitone, just to kind of keep it all together. So you end up with, if I take the filter off, you end up with something that sounds like this. So it's a really nice part, and I thought I'd use that for an intro. Along with that, I've got some sounds that I use kind of often throughout the track. This is just a little effects stab that I made from the intro of Tether. Really nice sort of metallic sound going on there. Also in here, I've got a bit of a that's just a very quiet kind of found sound sample. I really like throwing in these bits for electronica, like bits of noise and bits of sort of unusual textures. What else have I got here? I have started color coding my channels now, which has actually been helping a lot. Oh, this is cool. This is a producer called Isorhythm, sample pack producer, which is actually Matt Lange, who is a fantastic electronica and sort of tech house producer. Really recommend checking him out. And he's got these great free sample packs on the Isorhythm site. And this is a sound that he made from a bee, which he recorded. So you get really nice textures like that, and I just layered that onto the crash cymbal there. And finally, there's this sound. If I just take the filter off that, that is from the Soulsby at Megatron, that awesome little synth, which I hopefully showed you earlier on in my sort of quick studio tour. So that's the intro. All those things kind of going together. Let me just put that filter back on there. Alright, a bit of autopan on that. I use autopan quite a lot just to get things moving around the stereo field. One of my problems is that I tended to mix a bit too mono, and just throwing that in only on some sounds, it tends to make things really quiet and sort of uncompressed sounding, really dynamic. So autopan, kind of nice little trick. Right, so there's that. Moving on to the main part of the track. That's kind of the groove part, so it's got quite a lot of the key elements. One of the things I did here was I sampled that bass part from the original track and used it as a kind of like almost an Amiga sort of short sample time plucky bass sound. Sounds like this. That's quite a cool technique. If you can see the sample here, it's really short. It's just a little bit with a loop there. That's quite cool for the sort of trappy type bass sounds. And here we've got classic FM bass sound from the DX100. You get that really nice aliasing that you don't get from some software emulations of that kind of FM. Really like that, some nice dirty sound. And then finally we've got my sort of bog standard sub bass, and I use this sub bass in almost everything. I've used it in soundtrack stuff, I've used it in dance music stuff, and I even continue to use it in electronica. And that is just good old V station with PSP Vintage Warmer. Sometimes I'll put an EQ on this to just control the low end, but I didn't on this. I made this track quite quickly, and some of it's a bit rough and ready, but you can hear that really deep bass going on. And rolled all the top end off with a filter. So yeah, really recommend this. This is just a very simple bass sound. It's 2 sawtooth waves. Slightly detuned with a filter, bit of resonance going on, not too much. Don't want it to be sort of too boomy or baggy. And then the Vintage Warmer just absolutely destroys the sound. This preset bassline track is really useful, and you just get this enormous, like uncontrollable, crazy bass sound that it's good to mix quite low. And then a little bit of sidechain compression on that. I'm sure you've seen this trick in almost every single producer tutorial out there, but what I do is I have a kick drum that plays the same pattern as the main kick drum. It's called Ghost, and it's somewhere around here. Maybe it's at the top. Anyway, it plays exactly the same pattern as the main kick drum, and it is sidechained with this compressor. So all that means is every time the kick drum plays, it ducks the sound of this down. So it means that you can see it there, ducking the sound down. Every time the kick plays, the bass doesn't hit at the same time and cause sort of phasing. So altogether, you get this kind of solid bass type sound. One thing I used to have a problem with was mixing bass too loud in general, and you can see here like the sub is actually pretty quiet, and even this bass might be a bit too quiet actually in the track, but you just tuck that in behind. I tend to use quite big chunky kick drums, which we will now come onto, and those tend to conflict with that kind of bass. Yeah, I went a bit mental with the kick here. Let's just take a listen. So that's the main kick. That's kind of a standard like Vengeance kick sample. Really like big, has some stereo stuff going on as well. That's a little hi-hat layer. That's a sort of thumpy layer, which is from the deadmau5 X Fur. There you go, sample pack. And I've just taken the bass out and used doubler to really spread that out quite a lot. And then this is a little snare as well. Now this is a sort of something I like to do in electronica, is to give texture to the snare. You can see this kick doesn't happen every time. It's sort of on almost every other kick, and that just is like a harsh sort of bit reduction type sound, and that just kind of creates more texture basically. So you can do quite complicated kick drums in this genre, and that's kind of quite fun. You don't have to spend ages like you do in a dance track getting that mid-top layer to really punch through the mix. You can have a bit more fun and be a bit more flexible with it, and that's one of the reasons I like this genre, if it is indeed a genre. I don't really know what it is. Here you can see, I don't know why I've got two of these, that's just a mistake. That ghost kick drum I was telling you about earlier, which is just a copy of the main kick drum, and you never really sort of hear that, but it's just there. So all together, let's have a listen to the kick. Again, bussing these together would have been a good idea, but you can like that's kind of cool. You get this nice sort of chunky kick going on. Now, other percussion, the snare, this was a sample of the main snare from Tether, which is really cool. It sounds like this. Sort of very drum machiney, like a kind of almost machine drum type snare. Lots of noise and fizz, lovely sound. And some of my sampled stuff. This is from Isorhythm again, really nice kind of delayed clap. Really, really good. Use stereo spread on that as well. And I've done the same thing that I did with the kick. There's little accent samples in that don't happen every time. There's a little hi-hat thing. Quite a big reverb clap there. Very fizzy hi-hat. And that all kind of comes together. And I think I used a glue compressor. Yeah, this is a nice compressor in live. I think it's based on the SSL bus compressor. But it really, like, it does what it says. It glues sounds together. So I get my quite splashy. Oh yeah, there's that noise thing. This I can't even remember where this is from, but it's just like a weird noise blast thing, and that's really stands out there. What else is going on? I think there's some chords and stuff going on here. Yeah, I decided to write my own verse for this. I'm really into like more poppy verse chorus structure in electronica at the moment, because there's a lot of people doing the really cool kind of abstract stuff, and I want to do something different. So strobe again for some trance plucks. That's the more traditional strobe sound, that kind of deadmau5y sound. I love strobe. It's a weird synth, but it's really, really worth getting hold of. The Decam Synth Squad stuff is worth getting hold of. And what else? That's kind of it for this part. Yeah, I used quite a lot of delay in this track. Live's ping pong delay is really cool. I had this one with a really long delay time, 60% feedback going on there, triplets, kind of standard stuff really. And that's loads of stuff being sent there. Let's kind of progress. Now that I had this verse lead, and what I decided to do with this track was to use some of the more unique synths I have around. So this, I think this is Microkorg. Yeah, really like that sound. Bit of noise going on there as well, sort of to stick with the plaid-y type style. This is an Umbira, which is from a sort of, I can't remember the exact term, but it's one of those kind of contact packs. Really, really nice sampled Umbira, which is providing that kind of thing on top. This is the App Megatron. I really wanted a sound that would cut through the mix, and the App Megatron's really good for that. Really unique sound. And then this, I think, is the D550. It's like a bell. Yeah, kind of 80s bell sound, really. And I wanted this to be quite, because the original track's quite dark and sort of textured, I wanted this to be a little bit brighter and a little bit more of a sort of almost a dance remix, but paradoxically slow. So that was my thinking. Oh yeah, this little loop from deadmau5. Just really nice. Again, that X first sample pack, really recommend that one. So yeah, that's pretty much the verse. Oh yeah, there's another thing that I took from the original track, which is, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, this fill, really, really cool drum fill in the main drum part of Tether. But I just reversed a hit here to kind of get this like. And I did quite a lot of processing to this. This is my Boards of Canada like signal chain here, which has these EQs to sort of mess with the sound, 2 different frequency shifters, saturation, erosion, just really kind of make it sound like it's kind of on tape. And ended up with that really nice sound that just sort of gives it a bit of space. And when that comes in as a fill, it really changes the feel of the whole rhythm section. So that's that. Now we go into this breakdown, which I think is one of my favourite bits of the track, and I decided to do a kind of homage to Plaid's roots in sort of acid electro type music. So I used a straight up 303. Audio realism Bassline is still, in my opinion, one of the best 303 emulations, and spent a long time messing with this. There's an option that I found in here which it says, is it in preferences? It says VCA clicks, and I turned that off originally because it just creates these annoying clicks when the envelope triggers. So that's a tip if you're using this and you're finding it's clicking, you don't want it to. Play around with that. So yeah, I just that's a pretty kind of standard clean 303 sound, and I did this originally, and I played this part to my wife when I was kind of working on it, and she said like that's really cool. Don't do anything to that, like don't change it. And it really works nicely as a transition. You have this quite dense layered part, and then you come into this more chilled like electro section. Just to kind of give a bit of space is nice sometimes. This stuff was just this I took from the Tether app. I don't know if you've seen that, but Plaid made this kind of cool web app in sort of consultation with a web designer, and you can play around with the track. And one of the things that happens is you get this big kind of time stretchy effect. So I sampled that out, and then I used this grain delay on it to like create that kind of really gnarly sort of effect sound. Really good for breakdowns. I really like big spacey reverb and delay on breakdown effect sounds. Really, really cool, because you're trying to take the whole atmosphere of the track and really change it up in a breakdown. I think really, you know, give the listener a break, let them calibrate their ears. So I just used the 303 and some of the Tether samples. I did some extra drums for this, something I always like to do, just bring in some... Again, that's mostly 909 and 808 sounds, just to kind of create that sort of acid vibe that I wanted. Used a bit of the original Tether drums as well on top. So sort of duet, old and new. What's the idea? Something that's really important, I find, in breakdowns, if you're bringing your chords in like this. So here are the chords. doing that sort of housey style thing, it's nice to have a separate sub bass to just like add some punch. So if you listen to that with the sub bass, you get this nice like sort of bit more push to it, which is quite nice. So there's that. And then I wrote this kind of cheesy snare roll, and I really liked it, and I ended up using it a lot. It just sort of stands out, and I think blending these old elements in with the newer production techniques is quite cool, and it's something I'm going to be exploring a bit more. Quite influenced by my friend Dream Track, who is doing sort of housey stuff. He uses this kind of thing a lot, and I think it's pretty cool. So here's the snare roll. Really like blew this over the top, like lots of distortion and stereo spread and reverb. So just it's really silly. Other things in this, there are some risers and like other effect sounds which are all at Megatron, the like good old 90s cymbal crashes, but with a bit of trancey effects on them. That at Megatron noise thing again. Here's the riser from the at Megatron, really cool sound. Love that sound. I use that in everything. That was in the at Megatron demo track I did with Paul Soulsby called At Megatrance, which you can find on my Ensnare SoundCloud. That has that sound in a lot, and a lot of those other sounds. It's really, really cool for that. Now, the main lead sound, let's just have a listen to the main part of the track. Right, so there's quite a lot going on here. I tend to use too many sounds. This is a sampled part. The original track didn't have a melody like this, so I thought it would be cool to write one to, you know, really, really give it a hook and make something distinctive, so people could tell it was one of my tracks, because I tend to write melodies like that. So that's a nice sampled sound, really like the kind of tail on that, and just by using some release in the simpler here, you get that tail, the sort of the ding, ding, ding sort of part of it is really nice. Access Virus. I find the virus is actually really cool for these weird little digital sounds, as well as the traditional big, like distorted pulse wave, or the really fast pitch modulated pulse wave that everyone used off the virus in trance tracks. It's actually really cool for this stuff as well. So I really recommend the virus. It's an expensive synth, and the TI plugin is a disaster area in terms of stability, but the sounds you get with it are fantastic. Can't be beaten. PPG Wave, very cool plugin. The GUI doesn't work because I've got it J-bridged, but trust me on this, it's good. Just adding a pluck. That is a really simple like square wave sound from it's sampled from like an old Sound Blaster sound card, the OPL sound card, and I've got a big sound font full of those kind of sounds because I really like them, really retro. This thing, that's at Megatron as well. So all together, and there's this DX100. So yeah, a lot of things going on. I wanted a big, complicated, weird sound. And that ends up coming out really nicely, actually. Really quite a full sound. There's some stereo spread going on and stuff in that as well. And that's that. And of course that goes together with the chord sound that I played a bit before as well. And the bass comes in and it all sort of works together. Here's a sound that is quite nice. I use this for accents on this. It's basically a sort of Skrillex bass patch, and there's a really good tutorial on YouTube of a guy who's really meticulously recreated the kind of scary monsters thing. And if I can just, I'll just like quickly show you one of the things that's going on in that. If we get an EQ plugin like this, and we set up 2 little EQs, so there's one here, and one here. Now, what this guy does on the bass is he takes that modern talking oscillator from Massive, and he does another one with FM8 as well. FM8's really good for bass sounds. And then he sets up a macro, which you can do in live, and the macro basically automates these so that these peaks move along like that, and that's how you get that talky formant thing, the sound. And if you do that and you have like a saturation or an overdrive plugin afterwards, something like Isotope Trash as well is really good, or Ohm Force Omicide, you can really start to get those like nasty, like grindy bass sounds. It's all about complex modulation, and you have to be really careful with the amount that you modulate these. Like this kind of thing is too much. They have to sort of go, you know, just like move in and out subtly and create the space, sort of make these vowel sounds in the middle, and you get that really nice like dirty bass sound. And because, you know, we're not all sort of making tear out crazy dubstep stuff, it's nice to just use that kind of thing for an accent, so it really kind of goes well with the bass. Something I forgot to mention with the snare also is another dubstep technique, which is about boosting bass. So I went really insane with this because I wasn't getting enough bass out of it. But if you have a nice normal snare and you have this kind of low fat snare underneath, that kind of works really, really well to just give the snare some weight. So here's the snare without, and here's the snare with. You know, you get that push on the speakers that really gives you weight to that snare. And it's a cheap and dirty trick, but dubstep is a cheap and dirty genre, so why not? Yeah. That's that section. A little bit of a look at the breakdown now, but I think we've kind of mostly covered it. I wanted this track to be pretty simple. Oh, here is the Korg Wave Station doing this nice pad thing, and this sound is from the Richard Devine presets, which you can get for free. I think they're on the Korg site. And some of these are just really gorgeous for breakdowns, like really 80s, like doesn't sound like anything else. Vector synthesis, really weird stuff. So that's cool. And also in this, we've got all kinds of things going on here. Some drums, just little hi-hat things, not very interesting. Arps. So this is from Contact. CS80. Really good for those Blade Runner textures. Another Contact thing. Can't remember what this was. From yeah, Soniculture Abstract. And now what else? Oh yes, East-West Voices of Passion, which is something I use all the time. You will have heard this throughout my soundtracks. Sounds like this. And something I learned from an Armin van Buuren like trance producer masterclass video, sort of in the studio with Armin van Buuren, if you look for that, is you just put like full wet reverb on this kind of sound. You get a nice long reverb. I actually used the reverb I used for the crash cymbal for this, which is 25 seconds long. Really silly. But if you do that, you get this beautiful stuff kind of making its own chords as it sustains and plays. Really loved this like dirty little free synth called Nostalgia. That is another sort of sound blaster emulating thing. That's doing the bass in this part. Big old hall kick. That's had all the top end taken out. What else? I think there's some D550 going on here as well. Some samples probably somewhere, maybe later on in this section. But yeah, that sort of makes this spacey breakdown. is. That's a D550 sound, really nice, that sort of 80s TV ident sound. There's one thing I'm just trying to find here, but I'm not quite sure where it is in the track. No, there's a marxophone sound in there, which is a contact patch from a company called Rattly and Raw. Really think you should look into them, they're pretty cool. And that's that. So let me just go to the end here and see if there's anything worth thinking about. Lots of similar sounds at the end. So yeah, I went for a very simple structure here. Had the little intro bit, the intro verse thing, and then the build, the big like 303 section, building up, bringing in the main riff, and then having a verse, having a breakdown, coming back up, this second build. Try to do a few things in the second chorus to keep things going. So I put this this ride cymbal in, pretty simple stuff, and then I brought back in at the end that blip sound from the intro, just to do a bit of mirroring, like take you in and out of the track in the same way. So here you can see. There's a couple of other sounds in here. There's a little reversed sort of flutter sample that you hear every now and again, just to accent the drums, give a bit of detail. That's the kind of thing you can get into. I think it might be this. No, that's just a bit of line noise actually that hits on one of the kicks. Just blast out. I can't really hear it, but it's sort of another textural thing. Flurp. Yeah, that's what I wanted to show you. This little like percussion just pops out there to give a bit of emphasis to the snare. And that's your lot. Well, I really hope this was interesting or useful in some way. The only other thing going on here is on the output channel here, I put a little bit of compression on before I limited, and then in here I'm using isotope ozone again to do the limiting. I sometimes use Waves L2, which is a sort of you know, classic limiter, but I've just started to get into ozone. More dance music people using ozone now. Finally, up here you can see the thing that I'm using to do this recording is this, called Voxengo Recorder, and what I'm doing here is I'm outputting the sound from the sequencer to another sound driver, and then OBS, Open Broadcaster, the program I'm using to do the screen capture, is getting that signal and mixing it with the microphone. I've got a bit of work to do on making this as good as I possibly can, but eventually I might be able to use it for some streaming, and I'd like to make some more tutorial videos as well. Well, congratulations if you made it all the way through this video. Please do go to the link in the description and repost the track on SoundCloud and also like it. I would really love to do well in this competition. As I said, I don't think I can probably win now, but it would be cool to come second, so please do that. Thanks very much, and like and subscribe to this as well. Cheers.